that I have it.
Too many articles, too much. You have to frame this. Since I sent you all that, life as we used to know it has ceased to be.
Well, first tell me how your dialogue in Ireland went.
It's complicated. It's very complicated. Many people appreciated my attempt to take the problematic of memory as it's framed in Paul Ricoeur's Memory, History, Forgetting, the epilogue, and use it as a way of engaging contemporary life. Some, unbeknownst to me, are pro-Palestinian in a way that ideologically does not allow them to engage in complexity. And it was a painful lesson for me, Jason, one I'm still struggling with. When someone says they are not an Islamic terrorist organization, they are a social agency of resistance.
The they being Hamas.
Yes. And not only are they not a radical Islamic terrorist organization, you can't discuss Hamas without immediately putting them in the context of more than 20 years of Israeli oppression.
Mm-hmm.
So, segue even to the topics we're going to discuss. How do you engage in conversation? Not even debate, conversation, when the two worlds in which each of you come from have nothing to do with each other.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, this couple, she's a Ricoeurian, he's a history teacher, has written a very bad book on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. At one point, they said, "Why are you so worried?" And I said, and we've talked about this several times, Jews are afraid. Jews around the world are afraid. What are you afraid of? What am I afraid of? I'm afraid of the violence initiated on October 7th. And they laughed.
And so these are Irishmen?
No, these are British.
Okay.
They both taught. At one point during her presentation, she said, in a well-meant way, I understand I'm a white privileged woman and will never be profiled as the people of color with whom I work. So you're sensitive enough to admit publicly you're white and privileged, but you laughed when a Jew said they were afraid. And I'm struggling with, how do I engage that? Should I engage it? I don't want to be silent. Is there anything to engage? I've never experienced such a disparate gap. I engage Christians who believe the Messiah has come. That is something I don't share with them, but I don't consider it a disparate gap.
Mm-hmm.
These are well-meant, caring people for whom a cause has made them She asked the last speaker, "You and others have invoked the memory of the Holocaust as unique, but no one has named anyone in Gaza." I don't know where to begin. So, how did the dialogue go? It wasn't.
Sounds like it.
It wasn't a dialogue.
And that, I mean, some of those comments reveal, it's, uh, it's yeah, dialogue isn't the goal. It's signaling who's the in group and who's the out group.
It was a bitter reality for your friend who has spent an entire life attempting to construct experiences of dialogue.
Well, fortunately, here in America, everything has been fine while you were away.
Yep. Yep. The rapidity of change is itself disorienting.
I mean, so you want to talk about the Ten Commandments and Christian nationalism? Part of me wonders if people are even going to remember the story about the Ten Commandments in Louisiana.
I think, had the horrific act of violence of last Saturday not occurred, the 2025 program would have been more a part of the RNC. And we will hear more about the values. The speaker last night at least said there are two fundamentally different visions of America. And as a part of that difference, Louisiana, Oklahoma are first, and there will be others, Jason, who want religious values in the public realm. I do too. I would like religious values to be part of what represents me as a nation. But when I say that, I want that to be religious values that are incorporated in a wide continuum of pluralism and religious values situated in critical thought.
So the article you sent me, the headline is Christian Nationalist America, U.S. Jews raise alarm about GOP's Project 2025. And
That's from Haaretz. So first of all, it's an Israeli daily newspaper, certainly left of center at a kind of New York Times threshold of journalism, looking at America. And they did it on the night before the RNC started. Louisiana, Oklahoma being two prime examples of Christians came to settle what would become America. Protestant Christians are historically the dominant religion of the majority of people. But we are not a theocracy.
mm-hmm.
And that thin line, there are Christians for whom issues of when life begins and the protection of what no one can agree upon is in utero, they now feel they've been given, quote, a mandate to pursue. I feel sad for Christian clergy like yourself who are being misbranded. I sent that article to you because you're not a Christian nationalist. You're Christian and proud and participate in America. So, how am I, as a Jew in dialogue with Christians, how am I to help my Christian brothers and sisters be taken outside of an idiom being used in an Israeli newspaper?
So, there's a sense in which even the term Judeo-Christian values is a Christian imposition. So let's not assume any knowledge whatsoever. And can you explain to people how passing a law that says the Ten Commandments shall be posted in all classrooms in Louisiana does not specify how it's going to read?
So, I used to give lectures at St. Cloud State University on the issue of the Ten Commandments, where in some rural Minnesota school districts, the same issue was raised. Which Ten Commandments? Exodus or Deuteronomy? Which Bible and translation of which Ten Commandments? Merely using the idiom Ten Commandments is already an imposition on me. I call them the 10 utterances because the first is in fact not a commandment. I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. Period. There's no commandment. In the Christian reading of Exodus 20, Deuteronomy 5, there is a reorganization of verses. And a part of the next verse, and you shall have no other gods before me, is added in order to create the first as a commandment. So, okay, you want the tablets up. What are they going to say? Kill or murder? In what order? Do you understand adultery in the Ten Commandments refers only to women? Because the Bible was polygamous, and the mere act of having intercourse was the act of marriage.
It's less expensive that way.
Yeah, so, okay, you want to put the Ten Commandments up. But which? There is this tragic sense of people not thinking about what they want. You want religious values taught. Whose? Under whose authority? I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. Can we share that we understand who the Lord our God is?
Well, even I think my frustration, so for Christians and for Jews, there is no such thing as God in the generic, right?
No.
And I feel like all of these legal maneuvers, gestures, gimmicks, it seems like they're all premised on if we could just get everyone to believe in God in the generic, as a society, we would be on a stronger foundation. But biblically speaking, that's nonsense.
And I love your use of the word generic. I'm going to start using it more. That's the whole point. God is never generic.
Yeah, that it's for Christians, God has a proper name, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. For you all, God has a proper name that you don't speak. Like it's,
And let's not even get into Muslims. No, but that becomes part of the problem. There are, and the Feldman has actual statistics of the number of different faiths in Louisiana and Oklahoma. None of the other faiths are included in the laws currently passed.
Well, I'm sure that's because the argument would be that it's the Judeo-Christian religion that is at the founding ethos of the country, right? My pushback would be that even if we could get back to the deist clockmaker God of Thomas Jefferson, that's still not a Christian God.
And it's not the God that is being invoked so often at the RNC.
Mm-hmm. And it's hard. Yeah. And I mean, it's hard to talk about this without sounding partisan, but it's, there's an irony to measures like this to make our society more moral being done by a party that is entirely captive to an immoral personality.
I go back to, yes, I want religious values as a part of the fabric of national values. I want that very much. I don't want an amoral. How we do that requires critical thought and conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I had my student pulpit in New Iberia, Louisiana. So whenever Louisiana does something, I go, oh, that's interesting. It's a unique little part of America. Mm-hmm. French and indigenous peoples and on the Gulf. Okay, when you say the 10 Commandments, and it specifically says, I want no idols, no physical attempts. What do you do with all the statues throughout Louisiana?
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to put the tablets up in the school. What are you going to tell the students about all the statues?
Well, and that gets at, so Louisiana is such a Catholic culture, and that gets at the difficulty of, so like in Oklahoma, of teaching the Bible in a public classroom. That I don't think people really think about, like, how difficult this would be, because for Christians, because there is a New Testament, we read the Old Testament as narrative in a way that you don't read it, and certainly Protestants and Catholics have a way of reading Paul that is at odds. And so the idea that you could just neutrally teach the Bible without someone's perspective being dominant is dishonest.
Let's get to, how do you train the teachers to teach what you have just mandated to be in the classroom?
Yeah.
Again, what if we took both these laws and the fervor, the passion around Christian nationalism as a snapshot of the world in which we're living. Thank God, Trump wasn't killed. It would be exponentially worse than we're facing now. God did not save him. How am I sure God did not save him? Because if God saved Trump, then I've got lots of problems with who God didn't save. Okay, we aren't asked to interpret the theology after an event in the political secular realm. But there is this passion that continues to fuel the vitriol. So people say, well, why don't you want this? This is so simple. Surely we can all share this. The this keeps changing.
It's I have two thoughts. One thought is that the commandments reveal God's moral will that is, of course, universal. However, in that they're commandments, they are given to a particular community to bear witness to the rest of the world. So they're not just for everybody, right? In the same way that the Sermon on the Mount is not a general recommendation for average Joe. It's Jesus is talking to the disciples. And then just one thought I have. And then another thought. So immediately after Louisiana made that announcement, I saw a lot of progressive Christians online sharing memes lamenting that. So I think it's originally attributed to Kurt Vonnegut, not the most astute theologian who ever lived, lamenting that people want to post the 10 Commandments in classrooms, in courts, rather than the Beatitudes. And there's a really soft but ugly form of supersessionism at work in comments like that.
I always, when I hear these need to, we share the 10 Commandments, you're off by 603. There were 613 commandments given. These were 10 that, as part of the narrative, get highlighted. But they are not more important than the first commandment in Genesis, be fruitful and multiply.
Well, I mean, Karl Barth says that's a temporary commandment to fill the earth.
Yeah. But I have 613. I don't follow them. I critique a lot of them, but that's the point. Let's look at the whole text. Let's not look at just Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. And oh, by the way, which one about the Sabbath are we going to put up in the room? The remember the Sabbath or keep the Sabbath?
It's easier to remember it.
Yeah, because on Tuesday, oh, wow, I didn't remember it, which is why we need the keep. People,
I think what you're getting at is what we share. What we really share is the one that Jesus called Abba, and the Spirit, and we share the Spirit and the Father in a way that makes it immediately both easy and difficult to talk about these texts.
We share the common universal God who created the universe, and we share a scriptural narrative about our destiny.
Mhm.
The difficulties of the details of how that changes is why we're supposed to talk to each other. It's an ongoing common task. If you mandate that only one part of the conversation should be on the wall, where's the rest of the dialogue?
Mm-hmm.
Too much of the world in which we live isn't about dialogue, conversation. It's here are the 10 Commandments, learn them. But I have some questions. No questions. We don't have time for questions. The issues around the 10 Commandments, the issues around, quote, Christian nationalism, all of it forebodes far too much certainty, and certainty always dismisses questions and conversation.
So this article goes on to talk about Project 2025 and Israel policy, and unless something changes in the presidential race, I think it's all but certain that Trump will probably win a plurality of votes. And so, what mention a little bit about the concerns addressed, kind of beyond Louisiana.
He has, if I use his first term as a model, his links inside the Jewish community are to the ultra Orthodox, the Chabad, which comes by way of his son in law and daughter, who became a Jew, and very right wing Israelis. Miriam Adelson, the widow of Sheldon Adelson. She is herself an Israeli, a doctor, and gives her money to his PAC in order to get the most right wing Israeli policies, including, tragically, the West Bank. So his moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which many people perceive to be the greatest single physical act of support, I don't agree. It should have been part of an organic relationship that came out of negotiations. I thought it was interesting that Vance said, whatever you're doing, finish it. That meets the discourse of we are not going to be an administration at war. They will most certainly continue to use the issues of anti-Semitism as a, quote, cudgel. They have removed $10 million from the federal offices that would demand that schools don't permit discrimination, but they use it in the likes of someone like Elise Stefanik and congressional hearings. I don't know what a second Trump term will do regarding Israel. He was best buddies with Netanyahu, but then Netanyahu agreed that Biden had won, and then he was not Trump's best buddy. Trump's behavior with regard to the Middle East is transactional.
Mm-hmm.
He and his son-in-law did create the Abraham Accords, and they will double down on whatever is needed to get Saudi Arabia to be the newest cornerstone to Middle Eastern policy. That may or may not involve what Israel must do to get Saudi recognition. The circumstances in Israel as of this minute continue to deteriorate in ways that are tragic and beyond anything anyone could have imagined. I think the American Jewish community is divided. It has become more bitterly divided since October 8th. The encampments and the amount of fear people have and are beginning to express what will the fall be like. I think if you begin to see, as the campaign moves closer and he is elected, again, a renewal of evangelical presence and discourse, ultra-Orthodox, Chabad, the Lubavitch presence, long beards, black hats, what you're doing is adding to the depth of division. We go out of our way to figure out how to widen a narrow center. I am convinced that a second Trump presidency will, in fact, deepen the extremes. There will be more isolation, more marginalization, more fear and loneliness. And so I'm beginning since Saturday to resituate what I need to think about and do. I'm saddened by the values, the lack of leadership values that Biden has shown. I'm saddened that how will we explain to two generations away from us, these are the two men, the best two men to lead us into the next generation of America? It's an obvious question, and I can't begin to figure out what the answer is.
Well, one answer is that all of the people immediately beneath them counted in their self-interest to just continue with the status quo.
Right. But critical thinkers are going to demand of each other. So you chose to use transactional values. You chose silence. You chose immediacy over legacy. At some point, we're all accountable. Mm-hmm. Adolf Hitler was elected in the last democratic election of Weimar, and actually elected by those who didn't vote. Okay. I mean, the bill will come due. None of this is going to happen without all of us being asked, well, what's your part of it? And we're going to have to make decisions about the threats we made to move. And I'll never talk to them again. I think the American Jewish community, which is divided, and some of that division is not irreparable, but if it's reparable, will require significant, careful, critical conversations.
What about
How
so obviously there's a large Jewish community in Ukraine also, and it's been made pretty clear that a second Trump term would see the end of support for Ukraine. Is there a conversation about what that means for Jews there?
I think it's just beginning. I think it's just beginning. And the there's a kind of incredulity that whatever this party should be called, because I don't understand the word Republican as affixed to this political group.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, to have the Teamsters president speak,
Yeah.
it's a different thing.
But the Ukraine circumstance, very different than the Israel finish what you're doing and be done with it. These are people holding on at thresholds of survival that no one in America wants to think about.
Mm-hmm.
And is there any doubt what Russia wants? None. And, quote, Orban and his foreign minister attempting now to initiate peace talks. On what basis? Well, of course, on the basis of giving Russia what it's asked for.
It's always easy to end a war when surrender is the imposition.
And so it's another example of our refusal to read history, understand history, and take history seriously. I worry about just the category of what's called fear, even over the next 6 months. Should we be afraid that there will not be yet another attempted assassination of any of the 4 people and anyone else?
Mm-hmm.
So how did we get here? And not just here, but you look around the globe and it is the thresholds of instability that you see everywhere.
Yeah.
It should be a moment where religion offers consolation, where religion translates the eternal into immediate hope. The people who have the platform now are not offering consolation and hope.
I think it's interesting talking to some people at church on the left. The sense I get from them is not fear, but disillusionment. To suddenly see, the Democratic Party isn't a party acting as though Donald Trump was a threat to democracy. And now we have a Democratic president calling into a morning show talking about himself and how he's absolutely necessary to the future of the country, and a White House gaslighting Americans and telling them they didn't see what everyone saw. And so, a disillusionment that the two parties are not as different from one another as people believed.
And below the disillusionment, rage, indifference. I'm done.
Yep.
And we both have texts from the Bible that we've used and will continue to use. No, Scripture offers us a different model.
But I think because of their history, Jews have the advantage of not having too high of expectations of any one government, or nation. I think Christians in America across the political spectrum probably impute too much meaning and value to the nation, and are therefore easily disillusioned.
Good. So we need a kind of sharing of both those experiences. We shouldn't become cynical based on an infinite number of past experiences, nor should we become arrogant based on a misinterpretation of what we consider to be the risen presence of hope. There has to be, let's be a little bit more critically skeptical. But
yeah, because
God is present.
Because an unspoken assumption underneath civic religion, right, is a kind of permanence to the civic part of it.
Yes,
that isn't there, and so maybe the fragility of institutions is taking people by surprise.
Good. But we've had moments. 9 people murdered in a black church in the South, and within a week, the Confederate flag comes down, and we begin to move statues put up to intimidate. It isn't that we haven't all understood reality. It isn't that we didn't read the text and understand the text lesson. We get distracted.
Mm-hmm.
Saturday should have been an immediate moment of legislative unity banning all assault weapons. Should have been, okay, we're done with that. Yep, we see it. Yep. Doesn't matter whether they're mentally ill, they're gone. And we can't retrieve what we've sold, but we'll even ask people to donate it. Could have been, should have been a moment of testimony. Who's going to come down to the altar? But no.
I mean, it really is astonishing that it can, that problem, the issue. So the gun like it can go from Sandy Hook all the way to the White House with a spectrum in between, and it's just collective inaction.
And the conscientious denial is the action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. I know. I often think that, if you want to look at what like child sacrifice looked like, or among Israel's neighbors, like it's foolish to think it looked different than what we tolerate.
And this is an act of idolatry.
Yeah.
You are bowing down to a misinterpretation and ahistorical reading of the Constitution and what it meant to provide people with the right of. And a whole set of corrupt people who sustain it for the purpose of maintaining their own corruption. Okay, The guy was miraculously saved. And that doesn't make you shudder? I don't understand how I share the same universe of moral anchor with people who didn't automatically say, okay, everyone has to come back to the Congress immediately. We're going to ban assault weapons. We're not discussing it. We've had too many. We're doing it now as a way of expressing gratitude. Whoa, okay. That's leadership. Are we living in a time where people can be chastened?
Well, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. Yeah.
I think ideology at many different levels, especially in the extremes, has removed that trigger. So we're not chastened. It's like that has somehow been taken out of our souls.
Mm-hmm.
They were naked and not ashamed. Okay. The use of the double negative, one of the most extraordinary biblical, they were naked. We have no idea what that means. That it means more than merely without clothes.
Mm-hmm.
But they were not ashamed. Wow, they were. What would have ashamed? What? But the minute they eat from the tree of moral discernment, maybe we should put something on. But the text doesn't say they were shamed. Is the text in its absence implying it because they clothed themselves? Where are you? Well, I realized I was naked and I was afraid. I think that question is being asked out loud constantly, and we don't hear it. We ignore it. What? I'm not sure what. It is the first order question. Let's not put the 10 Commandments up. Let's put up the question, where are you, in all the classrooms?
That's good. That's good.
Because it's not a spatial question. It's a relational question.
Mm-hmm.
And all humanity keeps being asked, are we in relationship? Where are you? So for all my brothers and sisters who want Christian, Jewish values taught, let's start with the first one. Are you afraid of me?
I mean, I'd be okay with just starting with not bearing false witness. We start there.
Yeah. Yeah. What does false witness mean?
And not taking the Lord's name in vain, which is, well, you know, and so that, like, so I've been rereading Karl Barth's commentary on Paul's letter to the Romans, for preaching, and when Paul is describing the consequences of not worshiping God as God in Romans chapter 1, it's not simply unbelief. It's using God for your own ends. And there's no better example of that, I think, than taking the almightiness of God so unseriously that you will use his commandments as a political shtick.
Taking God's name in vain literally means, in the biblical construct, invoking God's name in an oath which you do not mean.
Mm-hmm.
I swear to God, I'm going to swim from Brazil to Virginia. No, you know that's not going to happen. And it's because you know what you're promising is not going to be fulfilled that the invocation of God's name as, quote, divine collateral is taking God's name in vain. We have accepted transactional use of the awe. Thank you, Dr. Heschel. The awe behind invoking God's name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I agree. You should not use God in a promise you cannot and will not keep. How many people do you think would agree with just that prohibition?
Say that again.
You cannot make a promise invoking God's name when you won't keep the promise. I swear to God, I'm going to keep my room clean. No, you can't say that. You aren't going to keep your room clean. Be honest. God has nothing to do with that promise.
Yeah.
Use God when you mean it.
That's a good word.
Swearing to God. Oh. I get very worried when the Christian athlete thanks God for whatever they've just immediately accomplished. Because someone didn't accomplish something so that they could go like this. Why does God have to be involved in a even significant act of sport?
Well, Bart would say, having just read him, that God uses the stuff of all events towards the reconciliation of all.
Okay. And what would Bart say about the guy who isn't pointing his finger in heaven because he didn't block the shot, he didn't knock down the pass, he didn't win? God is surely with the loser too.
That even so even that not doing is then gathered up into that person's story for the particular work of reconciliation.
Then we have to make sure that all athletes invoking God during the game, that all of them do.
Which is different than, so it's Bart's more nuanced in the sense that it's not that when Rabbi Joseph throws a touchdown pass, it isn't that you didn't throw the touchdown pass. It's that God can then take up that history towards the good with a capital G.
And the person who caught the touchdown pass is part of that history, but so too is the person who had their fingertips within a breath of knocking down the pass.
Mm-hmm.
I want the collective history. I don't want the history of winners.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But right now, that's all we're getting.
True.
And that's part of the frightening element that I experience, especially since January 6th. The crosses, the prayers for Jesus. No, no, no. This is not where God wants to be. And if you bring God here, that is, quote, taking God's presence, values, teachings, hope. No, you're breaking that commandment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what we have to talk about. I don't want to get into an argument that the 10 Commandments doesn't belong in school. I won't have that conversation. How many commandments do you want in school? I'll have that conversation. And how many different languages from how many different texts, and how will you prepare the teachers to teach it?
Yeah. Well, Joseph, it's good to see you again.
And we'll get back in our rhythm.
Yes. Yes.
I pray that there isn't too much change between now and next week, that we'll be able to recognize each other.